Good day, everyone, and welcome back to this crazy little world we call this nutritionally completely absent from anything that you might need to put in your body episode of Long Tracks and Tall Tales. I am your co-host, Mr. Scott G. Davis of Myth of Logic. Hello, everybody. Joining me today, as always, Mr. Christopher M. Clark, also of Myth of Logic. Today, we have something new on the show. We've been talking about this. We're really excited to have him on the show. Mastering engineer and so many other things that we're going to get into, Alan Douches. Welcome, Alan.
Hello, Alan. Thanks for being here.
Let
me in. Let me in the club. This is cool.
Yeah. Alan, let's just dive right in. Tell us about you and tell us about what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, on a daily basis, what most people know of me on a daily basis is I'm a mastering engineer. Have been for 25 or so years. Roughly speaking, I think there's 16,000 projects. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, I just, I kind of got into that from mixing and with working with a lot of indie labels that couldn't afford mastering, and I just kind of started doing it. I had known how to do it from visiting lots of real high-end places, and most of the people couldn't afford it. So I just created an affordable alternative to for in like the early mid 90s, something like that, to allow indie artists and indie labels to get decent mastering, which they weren't. They were just sending them off to the plant, So and so I just kind of built up a reputation for that, and then quite a few of those artists kind of struck it good, and it started to stick, and the reputation.
Well, bravo to you for that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I got to say too, and I also, I wasn't greedy about it, because I loved indie music, and I was mixing and producing indie music, and I knew the budgets weren't big, so so we kept it, indie, and that's what we worked on. So a lot of the early records like Converge, Dillinger Escape Plan, Mastodon, all these, and the Lower East Side hardcore bands, Murphy's Law, Crown of Thorns, these guys didn't have money, and so we stayed true to the scene, and we just did the best we could. That's developed over the years. We've gotten a lot more credibility, but we still really cater to the DIY and the indie artist. That's what I love doing. I love rolling my sleeves up and getting into it.
That's awesome.
Well, I can concur and back up what you've said, having done 4 records with you now.
Right.
And been extremely satisfied.
And I think an important part too is that we have a relationship, and I think all 4 of those records as a team have gotten better.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And that's kind of what people forget about, is like get your mastering engineer involved earlier in your record. Like you were sending me rough mixes from basic tracks before any vocals were on things.
Yeah.
And just kind of let me hear it, making sure everything was going right. And I know, like on this last record, I don't think I had to make many comments. I thought you were right on.
Well, I've kind of figured out, when you first start sculpting something and stamping a label on it, you're not exactly sure what it is yet. And with Myth of Logic, I didn't quite know what I was doing. Now I have a clear idea of what Myth of Logic is. And what a lot of people don't realize about mastering, and the way that I always put it to people when I'm telling people about Alan, I make recordings. Alan makes them records. That's the difference.
Well,
it's not a record until Alan has his way with it, and that's the honest truth. It doesn't sound like a record that you drop the needle on at home until it's been mastered by a professional.
Right.
And so, that's where I make that definition.
That's awesome, and that's a good distinction, very true distinction about records versus just recordings.
Yeah,
you need someone to give the final touching to it that really makes it alive.
Yep.
Well, and that's why it's also important to, like I said, get your mastering engineer involved, earlier in the process. Let them do some pre-listening to some first mixes. because sometimes, it may be too late. You may be heading up to a deadline or something, and, maybe there's just too much compression on the 2 mix. And, then you go, well, Alan, why didn't you tell me, or something, So, and I always say it does me no good to not make your record sound as great as possible.
Right.
Like what good does that do me?
Where's your interest in that? And
it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So, and that's just an ethic that I've always had. And a lot of people have it. It's not, I'm not unique to that, but the people that truly love this industry and what we do, that this is their attitude. That's what you got to do. Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, Alan, we are here to talk in great part today to talk about Dolby Atmos. And basically, I think that myself and others watching this, all 22 of you, watching this, the 63rd most popular progressive rock channel on YouTube, all of you out there would like to maybe know more about Dolby Atmos. Maybe you've heard a little bit about it. Tell us, Alan, how is it different from other formats, 5.1, DTS, et cetera, because it is different, and what essentially is involved in crafting that sound experience?
Well, I think to start from the beginning, I mixed Mastodon's Leviathan, Between the Buried and Me, Neurosis. I mixed them in 5.1, and nobody heard them. Because back in the early 2000s, if you were mixing in surround 5.1, and that's 5 speakers. So there's 2 front, 1 center, 2 rear, and a sub, the +1. You had to have separate hardware. You had to have 6 speakers. You had to have a receiver that would decode it, and you had to probably go out and purchase the discs. So there were a lot of things going against the audience, from actually hearing that. Dolby recognized that. And Sony did with their Sony 360, and now there's a new one coming, Eclipse, that is being put out by Google and I think Samsung. What they realized is, we can't ask people to go out and spend $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, on a basic 5.1 setup to hear this new format. Not to mention that, your significant other in your life may not want, speakers all over your room, right? So having a dedicated listening room is a rarity. So Dolby put their thinking caps on, and they created what we like to call an adaptive format. And what that means is that a single file, the ADM BWF master, will go out into the internet, and it actually can tell what kind of device you're playing it on. So if you're playing it on an Apple TV, you're airplaying it to an Apple TV to a receiver that has a 5.1 setup in it that you set up prior to that, then it will play the 5.1 mix. If you play Apple TV to a sound bar and a subwoofer, it's going to play the 3.1 section. And if your sound bar is somewhat recent, it will do Atmos, and it will actually decode the Atmos. So the beauty is really this one file isn't limited to a specific number of discrete speakers. It determines and does a digital handshake to say, this is what you're working on. And then the other side benefit of it is the binaural. It can even tell if you're listening in headphones. And the headphone, so the headphone experience is different than the stereo experience. So you don't, so like you say, well, what do you need on both sides? On the creator side, what do you need? You need one of a few workstations, Nuendo, Logic, Pro Tools. And now, from a professional standpoint, who doesn't have one of those 3, right? You probably have Logic or Pro Tools, right? It's built in. They don't charge anything extra for it. You just have to read the manual a little to figure out how to configure it. And there are templates all over the place. So as an artist, you can start mixing in Atmos with what you already have. If you have headphones and Pro Tools or headphones and Logic, you're done. You can mix in it. And as a consumer, all you need is a set of headphones and then a compatible player. It's, iTunes, obviously, Tidal, Amazon HD, and even YouTube Music. All will play back binaural and multi-channel Atmos. So again, what they've done is they've said you don't have to the consumer, you don't have to change anything you're doing, right? Don't change your behavior. Listen the way you normally listen. Just switch that switch on in the portable device that says yes. Whenever you detect an Atmos compatible file, play in an Atmos. And then from the creator side, you just need a set of headphones. Now, I say that on the creator side, that's all you need. And we work with people that's how they're creating them. And that's where, if you can team up with a studio that has an actual Atmos setup, then you can do all your, pre-mixing of it in headphones, and then take it to a studio in an hour, spread it out to the speakers and say, oh, wait a second, that was kind of stupid what I did, and let's tame that down, or let's exaggerate that. I thought it would have been more exaggerated. So it's really, from a financial standpoint, I have $70,000 worth of speakers surrounding me, but that you don't need that. I just need a set of, and you don't need Apple headphones. That's what everybody thinks. You also either have to have the AirPod Maxes or AirPod Pro 2s. No, I love actually using my Sennheiser headphones with it. You get Apple is a little different than all the other formats. They have spatial audio, and they have a slightly different way, which is, Apple's way, right? They got to be a little bit different. They have spatial audio, and what they do is they take the ADM master and they encode it slightly different. And as it turns out, it's firmware updatable too, because they're saying, like, listen, guys, this is going to get better over time. And it has. Over the 5 or 6 years I've been working in it, it has gotten much more reliable what the playback is compared to what you thought it was 5 years ago. So that's the hardest part that people just don't get. They think they have to go out and buy a bunch of speakers from either both the consumer standpoint or the creator standpoint. And we just did a record with a band, and I happened to notice that one of the guys in the band drove up in a Rivian, SUV kind of thing. And we were just mastering their record in stereo. And at the end, one of the guys was just kind of like, so what's with all the speakers, in here, And I'm like, oh, well, it's Atmos, you guys, whatever. Well, what's Atmos, and that happens a lot. And so, you start playing them some stuff, and, their draws are dropping. And they're like, holy cow, this is amazing, And I'm like, well, they can you do this with us? And I'm like, well, we can. Let's talk about why you want to do it. What is it you want to do? How do you want to present it? Because there's a lot to say there, right? Apple kind of drew a line in the sand that said, if you want to get on one of their, curated playlists, you've got to turn in an Atmos mix, or that's what they're saying, right? And they're saying then as a benefit, if you do that, we're going to give you an extra 10% royalty. Well, we all know that may not be enough to cover the cost for the Atmos mix, but many people, creators, I say creators because I don't want to just limit it to engineers, because we have lots of musicians that are just making their own music. You can create for a relatively affordable level, and then give us what we call stems, right? You just give us a drum stem, give us your guitar stem in stereo, give us your keyboard stem in stereo, give us your vocal with effects in stereo, give us your background vocals in stereo, with the effects. Now, the more stems you give us, the more creative we can get with the Atmos mix. But that is a Pandora's box, right? You're just opening it up to say, all right, well, what else can we do? So there's a balance there. And obviously that has to do a bit with the budget. But the more the artist, the creator can prepare the files, committing files, just taking your session, committing the files and just saving them as stems. And again, there used to be that everybody would be bouncing out these stems, and they'd be doing them in real time, because they're using outboard analog gear, they're patching in now, and we're asking for 16 stems. We have a sheet that kind of has a recommendation of how many stems. So now somebody's got to sit there 16 times, and if your song is 8 minutes long, you're sitting there for 2 or 3 hours exporting a stem, each and every stem. Well, the software, the DAWs are getting smart. Like in Pro Tools, you can create however many different bus outputs you want to bounce to disk at one time. And if you set your template up right, you just do one bounce to disk. And if it's in real time, which is the slowest, it will just, in 5 minutes, export 24 stems, 36 stems, whatever you set up as in your kind of template. So again, it's a growing thing. Oh, but back to the guy with the Rivian. So I said to him, well, you have that in your car. He says, no, I don't. I'm like, yes, you do. And he's like, no, I don't. And I'm like, so he found out that he did. He had to pay an extra fee, right? Like that's what the car manufacturers do. They build the firmware, the hardware into your car, but they charge you an extra fee to unlock it. But he did, and he was just like, oh my God, and it's in, I think 23 different car manufacturers now offer Dolby Atmos as an option. Pioneer came out with an add-on. I think it's about $1,500 that basically, it's a box that adds on to your existing music player in any car. And, it takes a little rewiring and stuff. So you might want to have a professional hook it up for you. But you can now take your old car, as long as it's got 4 speakers, and set it up, and it works.
How cool.
That is cool.
And that's that was the determining factor. I don't know, Monty Connor from Roadrunner, actually who's he with now? He's with Nuclear Blast, I think now. But Monty was running Roadrunner. He was like, I kept trying to say to him, come on, let's do an Atmo mix. Come on, what if these artists, and he'd be like, not until it's in cars, Alan, it ain't gonna fly. Well, it's in cars now. It's in a lot of cars, and you can put it in your car.
So the things that an artist needs to provide you to do an Atmos mix are the exact same things they would need to provide you if you were just doing a regular binaural mix only.
Yeah. Or like a stem mastering, right? Yeah. Like, which is now, we embrace, for lots of reasons, not just because, we want to remix your record at all, but we use stems for lots of reasons. If the vocal needs, if in the stereo mix, the vocal needs de-essing, I can use the vocal stem to trigger a de-esser on the stereo mix. So I'm not doing anything except using that stem as an external trigger to my de-esser. So now my hi-hat, my crash cymbals, my high synth part aren't triggering the de-esser, but are only triggering the de-essing on the vocal. So stems are getting to be a much more usable part of our production process. So stems, and it can be as few as you want. Sometimes we get 4, we get 4 or 5. It's really up to the artist, the engineer, the producer, what they want. And all the major labels have been asking for major stem outputs of all of their artists. It's in the contracts with their mixing engineers that they have to provide stems of all the major instruments, and it's a whole spell out.
Wow.
A lot of to take in. That's so cool, though. I find it fascinating that it's so much more widely available than people even really realize and know that it is.
Exactly. I think they're doing either a crappy job at marketing, or they're waiting for something. I don't know what, but but the thing that we find the most interesting is that I don't think we've ever come across anyone that in the headphones, the binaural headphone experience is always, in our case, is always better than the stereo in headphones. It's
really?
Yeah, but
that is interesting.
Well, because if you want something to be distant in a stereo mix, what do? You turn it down, maybe take some high end off of it, add some reverb, right? Something like that. In Atmos, you have distance settings. So, like if somebody's playing, a B3 Hammond B3 in a club that is dead, you don't want to add reverb to it. It's going to sound fake. But there are settings for each channel, object channel. There's beds and objects. I'm not going to get technical on that here, but you can basically say, where do you want it? Do you want it near, mid, or far, or off? Okay, so you can take that B3, pan it far left and right, and now in the headphones, it sounds farther away.
So it's not like what you're describing is not like regular panning on a regular mix. In Atmos, you're actually dealing with distance, not just panning.
Right. You typically, what do you got? You got volume and you got pan and reverb. That's how you work in a stereo field. I mean, obviously EQ, compression, all these other things, but to create where in this, soundstage you place an instrument, that's really what you're stuck with, a pan control.
So would a benefit of that be that if you are trying to in stereo create that feeling, you might be compromising the quality of the audio by doing it, but in Atmos it's doing it without touching the audio quality?
Their algorithms for these distance parameters are just fascinating. And I remember years ago hearing a demonstration of this guy Hugo Zuccarelli, which was holophonic playback, and it was just absolutely stunning. And I think it was like the early 90s, and I was a young engineer, and I was just amazed at that. And ironically, then in that same time, I think it was 1989, I was working with an artist on A&M, and he got asked to do some soundtrack music, some underscoring for a C flick, and but they needed it in Atmos, and so we actually wound up converting the studio to have a surround system. It was really just four. It was just left, center, right, and surround, which was one channel in the rear. And so I wound up mixing all the music cues for this movie, and I just fell in love with the center speaker. I was like, oh my God, here's the answer. You're trying to find that place in that delicate mix to put that lead vocal, center channel. There you go. It's beautiful,
Right.
As it turned out, that movie was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So it really took off.
That's cool.
Yeah. So,
wow.
But
Very cool.
I fell in love with that ability because that's the thing that everybody wants. Now there is a problem in music with just putting your lead vocal in the center channel, but from a film standpoint, it's awesome because you always want your attention directed to the center of the screen, no matter where you are in the theater. But the center channel can do the same thing in Atmos, but a lot of people are very scared about it because of the fold down and how you take something that is in a center channel and how it translates to binaural. You have to be very careful of that. So, and then on top of it, like Universal refuses to put the lead vocal in the center channel because they don't want you ripping it off separately. Because if you played, whomever, pick your artist du jour, and you play their Atmos mix, now you have their lead vocal separated, and now you do a remix without Suno and all that, So, so and then, like I said, early on, like, God, we did Mastodon's Leviathan album, and they pressed 5,000 copies of it in Dolby in DVD audio, and nobody could play it. Like I think it was the first 5,000 copies, and obviously that was 97, 98. I
was gonna say late 90s,
late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
So and it was Relapse Records. Gordon Conrad was the A&R production manager, and Gordon always took a chance, and he said, like, Alan, can you do this? And I was just like, hell yeah, let's do it. And we did some stupid things, like we panned guitars and solos and going around in circles, but really nobody heard it. And now we're redoing them in Atmos, and the binaural experience is just amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I love Mastodon, by the way. So I'm gonna have to listen to it when you do them in Atmos. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Well, and again, and then the thing is that you also have to, a lot of people put the priority of Atmos on that binaural experience, right? Because how many times are you going to hear your mix in a 7.4 9.1.4 system or a 9.1.6 system. It's going to be rare, right? But we Brutus, band Brutus from Belgium, they just did a live concert, and I was mastering it, and I said, why aren't you doing this in Atmos? And they were like, because we don't know about Atmos. And we did it, and there was no doubt that referencing it is a learning experience. How do you listen to this, right? And it's really the binaural thing. But then they rented a theater, and they played it back in a theater, because it was actually they were doing a theater performance. They filmed it, right, and it was really a concert kind of performance for theaters. And the first time they heard it in surround in a theater, they were just blown away. They were just absolutely blown away.
I can imagine they would be.
and that's kind of the experience a lot of people are getting, right? Like they may not have a 5.1 or more at home, but they might have a sound bar and a subwoofer. And any sound bar that's more than $500 can decode Atmos to a bit and make it a more exciting experience. And remember, you can turn the Atmos off, right? So if you say, what the hell is this? You just say, no, I want to listen to the stereo. So, it's not like it forces you to listen a certain way.
Right.
And all this information, is you guys are right. It's like people just don't know it.
No, I'm fascinated because this is all should be a lot more. I'm not going to necessarily say common knowledge. It should be a lot more out there than it is. It's not out there. I mean, at all.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. It doesn't make sense.
And here's there's one other key beauty to it, is that, we've been in this thing, the volume wars, right, in music for decades now, right? And louder is better, right? I know, Scott, we've been down this road, right?
Yeah.
Louder and brighter is always better, at least for gaining somebody's attention, right? They've drawn very firm lines in the requirements. Minus 18 is the top level you can hit, minus 18 loops. And that leaves a lot of room for headroom. And the reason they do that is that you have to be able to fold things down, right? If you're mixing in a 9.1.6 environment, you've got, lots of things and all these speakers, but you're only listening in stereo. It's got to take those, however 128 channels of Atmos in material and fold it down into stereo. If you just equally put them all into the same volume, it would just distort.
Yeah, it would saturate. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have to bring it down. And that's the other part of the other interesting thing, is that you're basically looking at, it's 128 channels. There's a bed that takes up 7.1.2. So that's 10 channels. So you got 118 channels that can each have their own volume, direction, pan and distance control. And then on playback, the Dolby software or the spatial audio software determines what you're playing this on, and says, okay, well, this is how we're going to decode this. So you've got it, in a 7.1 system or playback, it's in the rear speakers. But we in mastering, and actually you take it on during the mixing stage too, we determine how far those fold downs go down. Do you bring the rear channels down in your stereo or your binaural? 0 dB? Do you leave them at the same volume level, which is what a lot of people mixing music do? Or do you bring them down a half a dB, or 2/3 of a dB, or a dB and a half or something, so that it's not so, like, if you have something in the rear channel for effect, and then it folds out at full volume for your stereo or your binaural, it could ruin your hearing or something,
right?
So so there's a lot of metadata that is encoded during the process of making a master.
Very cool.
Boy, that's a mouthful. But I think the main thing that I wanted, and you've answered this question, is the necessary equipment. Now, let's say you get into Atmos and you start to appreciate what it can do. Can you make some suggestions on equipment, decoding players, speakers that aren't going to break the bank, possibly, or maybe that are going to break the bank? Things that would transform a normal listening space, like a living room,
right,
into somewhere where you can really hear what Atmos does.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, any sound bar, like I say, over, you know, if you're going to buy a $180 sound bar, you're probably not going to be experiencing much. But, you know, we have a KEF system here as a kind of high-end consumer system, and we have a Sonos system. So we check, our Sonos system is 5.1, our KEF system is a 7.1. So, you know, any speaker, you just need speakers, and you need a receiver that can decode it. And it doesn't, you know, like, you don't have to have, you know, 12 speakers, 14 speakers. You can just have 5.1, and you can build upon it, right? Like,
do most modern receivers have Atmos capability?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what I was driving at. You know, but is it necessary to have, can you just use a regular laptop to play the software properly? Or is it better if you have, say, a standalone unit that's designed specifically for that playback? Or
you're talking about playback as a consumer or playback as a creator?
Yeah, playback as a consumer, as you're sitting. Yeah.
Just take a USB-C to FireWire and out to your receiver, and it automatically does the handshake. You know, you might have to restart your computer or something because, but automatically converts it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in a lot of cases, if I'm understanding you correctly, folks that want to dip their toes into the Atmos waters, as it were, probably have everything they need already to enjoy it. And that's the exciting part about the format, is that it kind of, that's kind of like the ultimate backward compatibility, honestly. If you can.
They learned, you know, like I said, when we go back to those 5.1 mixes that I had done, nobody ever heard them. I mean, some people heard them, you know, but like
audio files and people who spent $7,000 on their system. Yeah.
And it was really confusing because the digital handshakes were happening. There's a fellow who used to write for Stereophile magazine, and we were really good friends. And he had just gotten a brand new Marantz 5.1 receiver, and I was over at his place, and the two of us were like on the floor with the manual trying to figure out to get this thing past, you know, a 5.1 signal, and it was frustrating. But the manufacturers, the hardware manufacturers, Dolby, they realized, okay, you know, people aren't just going to go out and buy more hardware. So we've got to make it expandable. And that's the adaptability. You know, it's an adaptive format. It adapts to your system. So if you buy a receiver that has a 5.1 output, right? And most receivers are going to have at least that, you know, but you only buy the stereo set first. Okay, there you go. So you're just listening to stereo, but then you upgrade it to you know, you want to upgrade to rears or something, you know, then you can work with it. As a matter of fact, I think that like those JBL bullets or something, whatever, you those portable little, you know, be kind of
small little speakers.
Yeah. Apparently they're working on the firmware so that like you could have two of them. Now you listen in stereo and your friend's got two. And if he brings his two over to you, it will automatically reconfigure in the room to now have quad. and the software is such that you don't even have to have them in a perfect like square. Like, you know, in our room, all the speakers are at specific angles and actual equal distant from the main listening position. And that's so that we, you know, we've trusted engineers, you know, technical engineers to determine this is the most compatible way of listening through, because you don't mix to speakers, really. If you that's the other thing to think about as you're mixing. You're not mixing to a rear speaker. You're mixing to a rear position that's in the left, in the back. You're really mixing in a sphere, and then the decoding software is telling it which speakers to play it on. If you have a sound bar with a subwoofer, it's going to throw some kind of out of phase thing to it so that it sounds like it's coming from behind you. And it does. And it's not that quirky, weird out of phase. It's not as accurate as having a rear set of speakers, but it still does it. And there you go. That's the, you know, expandability. You don't have to go out and plunk down. You know, I think our Sonos system probably was maybe $2,000, something like that. You know, the KEF system was maybe, I shouldn't be saying this, but maybe $4,000 or $5,000, something like that, you know. But we have to reference them on these systems, and but people can't go out and buy that right away. You know, that's a big chunk of money. But when you're buying your first set of speakers, you know, rather than just your earbuds, think about expandability. Think about how you're going to do this,
Interesting.
It's not, I mean, this has been a problem with the music industry for much longer than even the periods we're talking about. I can remember my grandfather having a quad system you had to have a quad receiver, and you had to have a quad turntable and a quad record. Everything had to be for quad.
Right.
And you couldn't play a stereo record on that. I remember trying to play one, and it was only coming out. It was kind of coming out of two speakers, but it was all.
They started making boxes to convert it to stereo.
Yeah. And that fell hopelessly on its face.
So that's what I'm saying. The format, like, they really got smart with this. Because even in 5.1, like, you listen to, some of the classic records, like, Dark Side of the Moon, or, some Yes albums that were mixed in 5.1. And if you're listening on a 5.1 system, it's amazing. But again, that's a rare thing for people to have. So now you mix it in Atmos. You have a 5.1 system, you're going to hear the 5.1 mix fold down. You have a 7.1 system, it's going to give you the 7.1 fold down. If you have a 7.1.4, it's going to give you the 7.1.4. If you got headphones, it's going to give you the binaural. And again, one of the problems that they started with was they had some really good engineers with good budgets to introduce Atmos audio to the professional market. And they were endorsed, and they made some really incredible Atmos stuff, right? Then it got into the professional market, and then there got to be a lot of bad Atmos mixes. And that's what a lot of people were hearing in their binaural. They were hearing this binaural bad mix and saying, I don't like this better than my stereo. My stereo mix, the stereo mix sounds better. And so now we've learned to say, you got to be checking this. And we do that, inside most people do this as well. Inside your Atmos session, you also run your stereo mix. And so you can A/B it in binaural, in headphones. So you can say, well, what happened to my snare drum? Oh, okay, I got to bring it up a little bit.
Now I have a question. Atmos knows what equipment you're playing on and plays back the appropriate format. Does that format that gets played back, does that represent an entirely different mix that was done by someone like yourself? Or is that software decoding it to what you're using it?
No.
So in other words, when you do an Atmos mix, you have to do a separate mix for each of these various formats okay.
You do one. Well, it has to be different than the stereo. Let's see. It doesn't need to be different than the stereo. If you set your mix session up initially in an Atmos template, but you could just listen in stereo, right? And just pan things to the front, left, and right speakers, right? So now you've got your whole mix in your DAW set up in an Atmos template, but you're only taking channels 1 and 3 as your left and right. But you can put on a set of headphones and say, hey, let's what will this sound like in binaural? And then you can start moving things around, but then check it in stereo. It's kind of like, earlier engineers, you'd check things in mono, right? You'd
still do.
Check it in mono. Well, it's the same principle here. You're doing the stereo mix, or the binaural or the Atmos, but you're checking it in the headphones. You want to know, because that's whatever percentage. It's a high percentage of people that are going to hear that mix in headphones.
A lot of people, including my wife and myself, we have these little Altec Bluetooth speakers that we use to listen by the pool and whatnot. Those are monaural. They are not stereo. So a lot of times I like to check mixes that I've done on that and go, wait a minute, where did the snare drum go? Okay, so I got to but that's something that goes back to, when you first start mixing things.
And we know it's a helpful tool, right? Because mono still exists wherever, be it in the mall, be it, on, whatever system that you want to hear it on. It's still a very useful tool. So you just build your procedures, and we're trying to also, not, obviously corner the market. We're trying to we work as a mastering engineer, I've been I work with lots of engineers as a team, Scott, like yourself. It's like, we don't want to see this format disappear. We want it to succeed. So we want to teach you how to work with this, so that our experience here isn't going to startle you, right? Like it shouldn't be that different. You should be able to set up an Atmos mix in headphones in your DAW, and then, send it off, or even take it yourself to, a room that has an Atmos or a 5.1 even, and hear it, just to hear what it sounds like.
Wow. Well, I guess the overall message is that artists and consumers, do not be afraid of Atmos. Embrace it. And, it's you're not the only one out there pushing the format. There's a lot of, big names in the industry that are out there pushing the format as well. Right. And I just think, to me, the most exciting and cool thing about it, from, what you've told us here today, is that it's, it doesn't require you to buy new stuff, and it knows what you have no matter what you have. And as you are able to upgrade your system, the same things that you purchased to play back on it are going to adapt to whatever it is that you've purchased. So it's forward compatible in that way.
I'm guessing that a lot of people who, if they even have kind of heard of it, are a little not worried, but wary of the people who would have heard of it. A lot of them would have heard of 5.1 and realized, oh crap, well, I'm not going to do something like 5.1 where I have to buy a whole bunch of crap to do the 5.1. So that's the message I'm getting, is this is a different creature, and you don't have to have all of that. It's far more accessible and easy to use.
That's why we say it's an adaptive format. It adapts to your environment.
That's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, Alan, I think that kind of covers it. And, I have to say that the things that you've said to all of us today would certainly be informative if I knew absolutely nothing about it. I've done a little bit of research, but, I'm still... Alan has been on me since the beginning. And since we did Surrounded by Ghosts, he said, this music is just crying out for Atmos. And you're not the only one who said that to me. It's mostly been, I don't know. I need to, at my age, I need to learn my lessons. And one of the lessons I need to learn is to break out of my old thinking and branch out into new things. So I think that Atmos is something that you will be seeing Myth of Logic in sooner rather than later.
I think something behind the scenes should happen, so we can show people. Yes.
We need to get our feet wet in that particular pond, I think. Anyway.
Well, it sounds like a phenomenal thing, and it also sounds like they're adding technology like that to everything, so it's the way of where it's going, so you need to jump on board.
Well, if you've got a popular platform like Apple out there saying you must have this, and if you do, granted,
and it's also, there's it's an immersive future too, right? I mean, it's like, with goggles, whatever, with it's either, meta glasses or Apple's, Apple Vision Pro, whatever. Gaming is in Atmos, it's in a lot of other places where you don't recognize it. And that, what happens too, is that a lot of people are hearing Atmos in spatial and they don't even know it.
That as we were talking about this, I was thinking to myself, have I been listening to stuff and it's been an Atmos and I wasn't even aware that it was an Atmos? Like, God, that sounds good, but I don't know why that sounds so good. But
this is why we've talked about this on the show previously, Alan. The only streaming I use is Apple Music, and it's because it sounds the best.
Right.
And I haven't been able to put a finger on it, but what you're talking about could largely be part of that equation.
But some very high number, I think it was 93 or 95% of all major label releases are in Atmos. It's just part of the delivery,
Yep.
And
and why wouldn't it be if they have the funds to do it?
Well, they do, exactly. So I mean, but West, that's why West Side Music is here.
Yes. Please tell us about
that.
West Side. I have forgotten to mention West Side.
No, that's fine. But I mean, like I said, there are ways to do it affordably, and there are ways to test the water. Do it with a song or two. You don't have to. I mean, it's obviously Apple will pay you a higher royalty if you deliver the album in Atmos. I think that's the way that they've given that extra 10%. But just as a creative thing, there are a couple we just did a record where we did the record in stereo. They wanted to do the engineer. Actually, I had done some things with this engineer in 5.1 for some film stuff a few years ago, and he just wanted to get into Atmos. So he's prepping the sessions for us that way. But the band released the album, but they're releasing the Atmos as like these bonus things, and like social media, like, hey, go check us out. We've got the new binaural version up of this. Go check this out. So it can also if you're looking for that kind of stuff, like where you want to keep your social media going, offer up the binaural there.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Little nuggets to use to kind of entice people.
And I don't know if you might have missed part of what happened there, but like obviously wherever you're listening, the music wise, but what a lot of us do is we take the binaural wave, we record out the binaural encoding. So rather than having this 128 channels of volume, distance, pan, locationing, we bounce it down into a stereo wave file, and that plays on all of your popular social media platforms. So you can put your social your binaural mix into that stereo environment. And that's how some people get away with it on Spotify. You'll see immersive versions of albums on Spotify, which doesn't decode Dolby Atmos,
right?
But they'll upload a separate set of waves with the binaural output.
And that's just one more reason to give the literal and figurative middle finger to Spotify. We hate Spotify around here, Alan.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I'm right behind you.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Let's not talk about that.
Let's.
I'm sorry. I can't resist. It's just so blatant and so greedy and so.
I hate it. I hate it so much.
Yeah. Well, for me, really, I mean, there's a ton of things. I love Apple Music. It's the most hostile piece of software imaginable still. It's just impenetrable to use, but it just sounds better. And so that's what is important to me. I want the streaming that sounds better. Spotify sounds awful.
Right.
And they don't pay anything.
Right.
So.
And there's Tobuz, there's Tidal, that play full resolution. Spotify is just
I have a friend in England who's very, very he uses Tidal a lot.
Yeah.
So,
That's my first choice that I go to.
Tidal.
But but because Apple, like I said, there's a slight difference in the way it decodes. Apple just feels like they have a better way. And I don't really think they're wrong. Because Dolby Atmos was originally designed for film, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brave, I think, was the first movie in 2012 that was delivered in Atmos. So the true Atmos is a kind of more of a film format. And just like Apple introduced AAC files, for audio, which sound better than MP3 files, they did the same thing with Atmos. They're like, okay, listen, this technology is really awesome, but let's make it more specific for music.
Right.
And it's a little harder to monitor. It's very easy to monitor that in Logic because that's an Apple software. But if you're in Pro Tools, you kind of have to do a little trickery using another piece of software to hear what the actual spatial audio, not just Dolby, but the actual way the Apple will play it back.
Interesting.
But again, for the artists, there's ways that we can, Samply is one great way that we use. You just upload the either the binaural or the MP4 to Samply, and you send that to the artist, and they can hear it right on their phone with a set of earbuds, and they can hear the binaural response. It will play, the full Atmos version as well, but a lot of people are checking in their earbuds because that's the way most people are listening.
Yeah. Very cool, man. Thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been great. I kind of had a suspicion this episode has been a mission, and some monkey wrenches got thrown in along the way because all our schedules are kind of convoluted and busy and everything. Right. And Alan, I can't thank you enough for making the time.
My pleasure.
This has been very rewarding. When we first started doing this podcast, one of the first things I thought is I got to get Alan on the show to talk about Atmos, and it's selfish reasons. I want to know more about it too.
Yeah.
So anyway,
right.
I think that's all we got for today. I have been and continue to be Scott G. Davis for Myth of Logic. My good friend, Mr. Christopher Clark over there, is busily composing drum parts for the next album. It's written, and if anyone watching this is an artist of any sort and is at all considering mastering your record, and if you're going to release it, you should, please reach out to our good friend Alan Douches at West Side Music. He's done a lot of records that I love, including the first 4 Myth of Logic records, and it's money well spent. And I guarantee you cannot afford not to have your album properly and professionally mastered. So please seek him out, and I think you'll feel very rewarded by it. So that's all we got time for today, folks. Until we're together again. Wait a second. I've gotten out of my window there. Oh. How to do that? It's confusing around. Until we are together again, be good to one another.
Thank you.